Welcome to the Darwinian Delusions channel. This channel is dedicated to showing that Darwinism is speculative, based on assumptions, and there's disputes about its most fundamental ideas. And we do this only by referring to secular mainstream academics.
So only 17 seconds in and we already have a major problem. Ayera and its old branches of the London Darwa movement as well as Mission Darwa have demonstrated what their idea of referring to academics actually entails. I highly doubt this has changed with the fracture that seems to have occurred, leading to the London Ayera team to all go their own way and create their own channels. But feel free to prove me wrong and to demonstrate your ability.
Earlier this year I gave a talk at Coventry University called Is Darwinian Evolution a Fact? AronRa made a response to that video which was uploaded called Evolution is absolutely a fact. Now there's a problem. He's just confirmed what I said in the talk. This isn't actually a response. A response would be to say Darwinian evolution is absolutely a fact, but AronRa didn't do that. So the structure of my talk was quite simple. I spoke about why science is revisable, all of its conclusions can change, and this is due to the philosophy of science, and the history of science also shows us that. Secondly, that Darwinism is not an exception. Thirdly, I spoke about some of the problems that mainstream biologists are bringing up about the Darwinian history of life and the Darwinian mechanism. Darwinism, remember, is the particular history of evolution. Darwinism claims that there was a single origin and all of the billions of species we have alive today came from that single self-replicating cell through this branching tree. And this happened because of natural selection working on variations. Evolution, on the other hand, is something uncontroversial and not something which anybody should really dispute, which is the fact that we have a change in the living biological world over time. That's not really controversial. You can also break it down a little bit further and say evolution is change in gene frequencies in a population over time. Or you can say evolution is observable because we can see bacteria mutates, and when you apply medicine to it, it's resistant to that. You could also say the Great Dane and the Chihuahua are linked. So all of these types of evolution, which we can pretty much observe in a lifetime, that's not really a problem. Nor is there a problem with claiming that this evolution has been happening for millions, perhaps billions of years. None of this is an issue at all. What is an issue is universal common descent, and also that all of this happened because of natural selection working on variations in an unguided way, and you don't need God, you don't need nothing for that. It's just a completely blind naturalistic process which created all of this, the blind watchmaker thesis, if you want to call it that.
Except, as AronRa noted in his video, this is a complete lie.
Your definitions are very confused. I understand biological evolution to be a theory of biodiversity and an aspect of population genetics summarily defined as descent with inherent modification. If you call it Darwinism, then you're limiting your mechanisms to the ones Darwin proposed, natural and sexual selection. But evolution has moved on since Darwin, and we're not all that concerned with just the Darwinian mechanisms anymore. And you cite people who you think disagree with the Darwinian mechanism, natural selection, but you say you don't have a problem with it. You even called it an observation in the same talk where you said that it is not a fact. That's confusing. Yet your challenge seems to be whether the function itself is a fact, because you keep implying that about the Darwinian explanation of evolution, as if you accept evolution but think there's a better explanation for it. I know that is clearly not what you mean. You don't accept evolution at all, largely because you don't know what it is, and you don't know what the evidence for it is, and you don't know what we know about it. You don't even know that we know anything about it.
So all you have actually done is relabeled what is actually termed evolution in modern biology as simply Darwinism, before stripping away all the qualities you do not like from this founded field of science and claimed your redacted version is the true evolution. Of course, this does not stand, and the most cursory investigation will reveal that fact, so your only method in challenging this is to continue propagating a known lie in the hopes that you may preserve yourself. This is not unlike the way that you, Imran Hussein and Hamza Sorcius, treated me during the events of August through October of 2015. Ultimately, you fail to address a single aspect of AronRa's fully fleshed response. All this simply boils down to is the old macro versus microevolution, with slight variations to young Earth creationists in that you acknowledge millions or even billions of years, though a little gingerly on the latter. You make these same arguments based around this vague idea of kinds, or this orchard of life, using the go-to example of two different breeds of dogs. But just like the older renditions of this argument, yours is equally lacking in any and all basis.
Now these two things are very different, evolution and Darwinism. So what AronRa basically did is something I warned against in the beginning of my talk, which is the fallacy of equivocation. He was trying to say that Darwinism is true by showing that evolution is true, but evolution doesn't equal to Darwinism.
Except for the fact that you lying about the definition and field of evolution does not make this noted correction of that misinformation an equivocation fallacy. The term evolution is very clearly defined throughout the field of science, only being bastardized outside said science by individuals, such as yourself, attempting to discredit said field by redefining it in a way that better suits your dishonest narrative. Had you not lied in the first place on a topic you have been corrected on countless times, leaving you no excuse for said misinformation other than an active and conscious dishonesty, AronRa would not have had to come along and point out your dishonesty. But either way, AronRa did supply evidence for what you have dishonestly termed as Darwinism earlier. So I'm going to play your clip first, reminding us how you define said term, before going on to AronRa's original response video, which covered every aspect you mentioned.
Darwinism claims that there was a single origin and all of the billions of species we have alive today came from that single self-replicating cell through this branching tree. And this happened because of natural selection working on variations.
It's not proving something else. It's answering your question. You want proof that evolution is a fact? Look at the fact that evolution happens, that biodiversity and complexity do increase, that both occur naturally according to the laws of population genetics amid environmental dynamics. Look at the fact that alleles vary with increasing distinction in reproductive populations, and that these are accelerated in genetically isolated groups. Look at the fact that natural selection, sexual selection, and genetic drift have all been proven to have predictable effect in guiding this variance, both in the scientific literature and in practical application. Now look at the fact that significant beneficial mutations do occur and are inherited by descendant groups, and that several independent sets of biological markers do exist which trace these lineages backward over myriad generations. Look at the fact that birds are a subset of dinosaurs in the same way that ducks are a subset of birds, and of course that humans are apes in the same way that lions are cats, and so on. Now look at the fact that the collective genome of all animals has been traced to its most basal form through reverse sequencing, and that those forms are also indicated by comparative morphology, physiology, and embryological development, as well as through chronologically correct placement of successive stages revealed in the geologic column. Now look at the fact that every animal on Earth has obvious relatives either living nearby or evident in the fossil record, and that the fossil record holds hundreds of clearly transitional species, even according to the strictest definition of that term. Look at the fact that both microevolution and macroevolution have both been directly observed and documented dozens of times, both in the lab and in naturally controlled conditions in the field, and that these instances have all withstood critical analysis in peer review. And consider the fact that evolution is the only explanation of biodiversity with either evidentiary support or measurable validity, and that no would-be alternative notion has ever met even one of the criteria required of a scientific theory. Creationism, since you brought it up, is not in any sense a working model capable of explaining anything at all. It isn't supported by anything and has already been disproved on every testable claim that it makes. You're trying to ride a dead horse.
So what we can observe from this interaction was that AronRa gave you the evidence of not only what you dishonestly have termed evolution in its redacted form, but what science calls evolution and you refer to as Darwinism. Had you actually been interested in pursuing the truth at all in the name of discourse and science, you would have discussed the evidence as opposed to simply upholding your dishonest usage of the English language. No matter what you call it, he proved it and you ignored it.
So what I recommend he does is make a video called Darwinian Evolution is a Fact, and explain why all of the scientists and all of the philosophers who are all mainstream secular academics are actually deluded and wrong about their views about Darwinism. And he also needs to show why Darwinism is an exception to the philosophy of science and the history of science, because to claim it is the truth is to claim that it is immune from the problem of induction. I thank you very much for listening. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.
Except this demand presupposes that said specialists of the field disagree with AronRa, with actual evolution, and, for some unknown reason, agree with you. This is simply another bold-faced lie. It is true that the theory of evolution has adapted since it was first published by Darwin, but none of those qualities you listed earlier.
Darwinism claims that there was a single origin and all of the billions of species we have alive today came from that single self-replicating cell through this branching tree. And this happened because of natural selection working on variations.
None of those are among the aspects which have been challenged. This is therefore simply a conjuring of your imagination which you are projecting onto AronRa as if it were his inability. The reality is that you are simply unable to tackle evolution at any level, and thus must resort to direct dishonesty, a tried and tested AronRa staple. But I feel that perhaps we should take a look at some of the other videos on your channel, because perhaps your failure presented here is in no way indicative of your work as a whole, and thus it would be an unfair move on my part to pretend otherwise. The first video I have chosen covers a topic I have personally corrected you on over the years, titled Speculation on Human-Ape Ancestry.
Welcome to the Darwinian Delusions channel, a channel dedicated to showing that Darwinism is speculative based on assumptions, and there is disputes about its most fundamental ideas amongst secular academics. Now today what I want to speak about is human-chimp common ancestry. Now what we are told is this is a fact. It is as true of a fact as the Earth going around the sun. And if you are in a supermarket, you're likely to pick up something like this: almost human, new fossil found. If you put on the TV, you're likely to see a documentary and see how human beings evolved from a common ancestor with other primates.
And if you actually go and read peer-reviewed scientific journals or governmental institutions breaking down said academic journals for easier access, you will find a demonstrable genetic link between Homo sapiens and pan-troglodytes, i.e. human beings and the common chimpanzee. These things, not popular magazines which have been purchased by Rupert Murdoch or documentaries on TV, are what count. Demonstrable and repeatable science that clearly demonstrates common heritage.
But what I want to show today is behind all the detail and the technical jargon, there is a speculative assumption. Now interestingly, this book, which is called Advanced Biology by the biologist Mikkelsen, published by Oxford University Press, does what you usually see in a documentary. It goes over Homo habilis, Homo erectus, it gives you all the different things about anatomy, about the various Lucy fossils that have been found, the Lucy fossil that's been found, and about migration and so forth. But interestingly, right at the beginning, what Mikkelsen says is this, and this is a subtitle on page 458 called Studying Hominid Evolution. The study of evolution of modern humans from hominid ancestors is very speculative. Much of our present understanding is based on very little evidence. Now he makes that small admission before going into all the detail about human evolution.
Well, all he actually states in the quote is that the evidence at the time is rather dispersed and has to be drawn together and is still being tested. But this book was published back in 2000. 3 years prior, the National Human Genome Research Institute announced their success in sequencing the human genome, and 5 years prior, the phylogenetic comparisons between humans and common chimpanzees. Now, said textbook never was a peer-reviewed journal article. It's not even for university level, being an A-level textbook, and can easily be argued to have been too conservative even for then. But the fact is, now we have better gene sequencing techniques than we did at the time, and the evidence for common hominidae origin and a common origin for all life has only grown. Only the slimiest in discussion, the most dishonest going, would ignore more recent peer-reviewed journal articles which have been supplied to you in the past in favour of a non-peer-reviewed textbook published over a decade ago.
Now, human beings generally, what we do is when we see detail and we see graphs and we see pictures and we see figures, we just get, we just go into this mode of, oh, it must be true because there's so much detail. But before going into the detail, you have to understand that no matter how much detail they pile, no matter how many papers they print, no matter how many, pictures that they recreate, using a skull, a human-like picture, all of this is still very speculative. And these aren't my words. This is the word of a biologist, and this book is published by Oxford University Press. I hope you have learnt from this episode the speculative nature of Darwinism. And like I say at the end of every episode, please let us know if there's something you would like us to respond to.
This isn't so much quote mining as quote archaeology. Who, with an honest mind, would return to an outdated science textbook from 16 years ago and present it as a contemporary position? But am I honestly surprised? Not really. I know AronRa has a nasty habit of using decrepit sources as a basis for their arguments, as demonstrated by an earlier video on their channel, Mission Darwin, which contained not a single source published within the last 14 years of the video's publishing, with most of their sources being from the 70s and 80s. It's just part and parcel of their jobs, as when they have attempted to use more modern sources, they have been crushed repeatedly. None of us have made this argument that a diagram acts as evidence, as you seem to fallaciously believe, but what those diagrams represent has a scientific foundation to back them up. That is what is important, that is what you need to address, and that is what you have failed to tackle so far. So before you make an absolute arse out of yourself in going after people such as AronRa, make sure you know what the hell you are talking about. So I feel like we have time for one more. So this time I'll be going to the video titled Of Vultures and Darwinists.
Welcome to the Darwinian Delusions channel, a channel dedicated to showing that Darwinism is speculative, based on assumptions, and there is dispute about its most fundamental ideas. And we do this only using mainstream secular academics. Today what I want to speak about is the Darwinian history of life. Now, Darwinists claim that some 3 to 4 billion years ago, there was the first self-replicating cell. And from this one cell, you had a branching tree which led to all of the billions of species alive today. Now, to believe in common ancestry is not really a big problem. The idea of universal common ancestry is something which is really a gross simplification of the history of life.
You do realise that just because you repeatedly lie at the start of every video like some mantra, that doesn't magically change reality. I get that this might be hard for you to understand, but you have never done any such thing for evolution. That is the non-redacted form of evolution you have taken to terming Darwinism. I'm still waiting for you to demonstrate controversy over universal ancestry for all known multicellular life on Earth.
Now, since this is a grand claim, they need some grand evidence.
Well, if you want grand, I suggest starting with the centuries of biological and fossil taxonomy through anatomy and physiology, embryology, and most recently genetics, all of which independently verifies this origin and, when put together, makes a case that you have failed to tackle to date. So the bill has been paid. It's now just a question as to whether you will acknowledge that, or still insist that demonstrable science is a lie and that what it clearly demonstrates does not exist.
They don't actually have this, but they have an assumption. And that assumption is similarities that you see in organisms are only due to common descent. Now, like I mentioned previously, common descent, generally there's no problem. The problem comes when you assume there's universal common descent.
The problem here is that the universal descent of multicellular life is no more extraordinary than multiple origins. In fact, the former is simpler in that it only requires a single abiogenesis event over several of the same event, meaning that if we apply Occam's razor to this argument, your orchard of life collapses completely. The fact is, if we got you to map out the supposed orchard of life, using the exact same methods as you just utilized yourself, we can neatly clip the trees together. That is to turn many branches into a tree. But again, the methods of examination have not changed in the slightest. You simply resort to double standards as one of these, the more scientifically based one, refutes the very basic foundation for your religion. This is what we refer to as confirmation bias, and is why your intellectual honesty is near non-existent. A harsh analysis maybe, but an accurate one most certainly. Had you actually wanted to learn over wanting to preserve your holy text, such dishonesty would not be needed.
So, if you imagine you are sitting in a room and there is a bunch of scientists around you, and you are asked to identify between three organisms which has the most recent common ancestor. And in front of you there is a lion, there is also a vulture, and there is a bat. Now, based upon this Darwinian idea of universal common ancestry, if you were to look at these three organisms, which one would you infer had the most recent common ancestor?
Well, quite obviously it's the bat and the lion, due to both having various mammalian features, including, but not limited to, their canines, the fact that they give live birth, the fact that they produce milk, and the presence of fur. These would be the first features I could note just there and then. Then we have other anatomical features as well as genetics to co-verify this, consolidating the conclusion. But that's a trick to your question, isn't it? You fail to specify the level of training in biology the individual has, the amount of time they are given to conduct their examination, and whether they can use other methods to co-verify their visual observations, as actually happens in science. Scientists did not run from room to room, declaring which species are related in which way based on a simple glance. They whirled centuries of observation and study to draw out the most basic tree of life, which has since been put to the test repeatedly and has in every single one of those times come out on top.
Obviously, it would be the vulture and the bat, not the lion, because they both fly, and physiologically they're quite similar.
No, they really are not. Have you ever actually examined a bird or a bat? A bird has no teeth, produces eggs, and relies on feathers for flight. Meanwhile, bats have canines, produce live young, and are reliant upon skin stretched between their fingertips to their hind legs, as well as between said hind legs. That's why the flesh and muscle of bird wings is more concentrated towards the chest, as their wing area is extended by the feathers, whilst the bat is all flesh to the very wingtip. That's not to mention the extreme difference in torso. So no, the two are not similar beyond the most cursory glance. It flies is not a basis for taxonomization, and never has been outside your God's supposed screw-ups in the First Testament. So not only are you happy with lying about the process of taxonomization through anatomy and physiology, but you're happy lying about what they find.
But if you look at the genetics of those three organisms, the lion is actually close to the bat. Now, this is just one example in nature of where this Darwinian assumption completely falls apart. And there is a lot of evidence of organisms that have almost identical features, but they are not thought to be from a common ancestor. So this idea of universal common ancestry, which does not allow for there to be multiple origins and for there to be multiple branching trees perhaps, is something which is fundamentally flawed. I hope you learned something from this video. If you've got anything that you've come across online that you want us to respond to, please comment below. Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, I've learned that in all the years, you still haven't managed to evolve above being such a dishonest character. Lying about the process of taxonomy only helps preserve the belief of those ignorant to how said process actually takes place. Also, it is genetics which displays the fact that all multicellular life we know of has a singular origin, so why you felt it wise to mention that is beyond me. Now, I've heard the argument that this is fallacious because God used the same building blocks for all life, like a child restricted to the blocks of their Lego set, which is again putting restrictions on said God. A further problem with this is that it doesn't explain the existence of benign genetic code, which has no effect whatsoever on the final organism, and yet can be traced between the so-called trees of life. Universal ancestry has an explanation. The Quran spewers do not. And this is simply one of the many issues with the misinformation you spread across British campuses and here online. At every single point, the evidence refutes your position and verifies that of evolution, or Darwinism as you so dishonestly call it. So take your redacted form of evolution, go and study actual science, and I mean study, not go back quarter of a century to find stuff that has vague suggestions that agree with you. Actually look at modern science and learn. Change your position based on the evidence. Until then, you'll be stuck giving out the same tired lie as you have been doing for the last several years. There are a few things which I'd just like to add here at the end of this video. The first is a massive thank you to everyone who has ever donated to me via Patreon. Your fantastic support has given me the ability to keep this channel going, and I hope to continue producing content in the years to come. Secondly, I would like to thank anyone who has ever interacted with this channel. Your shares, likes and dislikes, as well as your comments of both approval and disapproval, have ensured constant feedback, allowing me to improve my work. Last of all, I would like to express my desire that you treat any of the people displayed throughout the video with respect. Whilst it is true that ideas do not demand respect, and there are many in fact which deserve reprehension, we must be careful on how we tackle said ideas in ensuring we are not simply targeting the person. In short, be the compassionate side of reason. So take care, and I'll see you next time.